Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back after a short break. We're starting the third session of our conference. My name is Bartosz Działoszyński from Faculty of Philosophy, University of Warsaw, and I will be the chair of this session. In this third session, we will discuss issues connected with ethics by design approach towards problems of digital transformation. And our first speaker will be Catharina Rudschies from University of Hamburg with presentation titled Exploring the Concept of Solidarity in the Context of AI, an Ethics in Design Approach. Please, the screen is yours.
Yes, hi. I just share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now? My presentation, yes. Okay, good. Yeah, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Catharina Rudschies, and I am a research associate and PhD student at the University of Hamburg in Germany. And what I want to present to you today is part of my PhD thesis, in which I explore the principle of solidarity in the context of artificial intelligence. So what does that actually mean? So my starting point was that in the ethics in AI debate, many principles have been proposed to guide the ethical design and deployment of AI. One of them is the principle of solidarity. However, so far, it has not really been defined what solidarity could actually mean in this context. So meaning how it could be conceptualized and put into practice. So my approach is to explore it in different ways, because solidarity is a multifaceted concept which can come in many different forms, and that's also why there are so many different conceptualizations of solidarity to be found in the academic literature, and it really depends a lot on the discipline and the context of application, how the concept is defined. Since my research is now located at the intersection of disciplines, so in an interdisciplinary field, I didn't want to use one of these discipline-specific conceptualizations. So I first tried to deduce the primary elements of solidarity from a rather wide body of literature, from different disciplines and fields, in order to understand solidarity's core, and then to have a more discipline-neutral kind of conceptualization of solidarity. So what I came up with is that solidarity's core is constituted basically of 5 elements that on the one hand refer to the more descriptive aspects of solidarity, where solidarity is perceived as a social practice, and on the other hand refer to more normative dimensions of solidarity. And this gives us a conceptualization that can be used to explore solidarity in many different contexts. So yeah, let's go through these 5 elements very quickly. So first, we have an element of relationality. So this basically refers to the question, who is solidary with whom? Then solidarity requires a connecting element that builds the basis for the relationship. So this could be, for instance, shared values, a shared identity, collective interests or goals, or an interdependency that arises in socioeconomic context. So there's multiple aspects that could actually form this kind of connection. Then we need an element of awareness and recognition of the social bond, because for solidarity to rise, people need to be aware of and recognize their connection with others in order to identify with the group or the collective interest. So I would argue that there is a necessary cognitive dimension to solidarity, which leads people to extend their awareness beyond the individual, and which then develops into concern for those he or she shares a relationship with, and for the community overall and the collective interest, basically. Then fourth, there needs to be a motivation source for people to act for the sake of the group or its goals. And here I base my ideas primarily on Axel Honnold's theory of the struggle for recognition, in which he claims that a state of solidarity can basically only exist in communities that are based on relations of mutual recognition. And in Honnold's terms, mutual recognition means that members of a community recognize each other's rights and grant each other social esteem, meaning that they recognize others' value in the contribution for the collective or the shared project. So Honneth argues that mutual recognition ensures that each individual is able to self-realize within the community or the collective, and that gives him or her the opportunity and also agency, and I would argue even the motivation to act on behalf of the collective. Because if we all abide by the same rules, then this makes it more likely that we will actually be willing to work jointly for the sake of the collective good or goal. And then lastly, solidarity brings about an element of duty. So it puts obligations on each member of the collective. This is first of all that when we actually commit to these relations of mutual recognition, then it puts a duty on each of us not to do harm to the other members of the society. And then also solidarity involves collective action for the sake of a collective benefit. So if we collectively share the benefits, then from a normative point of view, we also need to collectively shoulder the risks and the burdens. So responsibility for both the benefits and the risks is shifted from an individual towards the group, whereby each member of the group is responsible for their fair contribution to the common aim, as well as their fair share of the risks or costs. And consequently, the duties of solidarity ought to lead to just distribution of benefits and burdens. Okay, so much about this theoretical account. Now let's apply this to artificial intelligence from an ethics and design perspective. So I use actually ethics in design because Virginia Dignum defined it this way. So I used the definition by Virginia Dignum, and I quote, ethics in design is the regulatory and engineering methods that support the analysis and evaluation of the ethical implications of AI systems as these integrate or replace traditional social structures. So there are multiple ethics in design methods, such as value-sensitive or participatory design. But what I did in my paper is to approach the application of solidarity and ethics in design in a more general sense, meaning that I ask, how could we apply the principle of solidarity in the development and the design of an AI system? And then I try to examine to what extent different kind of ethics and design methods could help in the endeavor to design AI that is actually in line with solidarity. Okay, so as I explained at the beginning, these first three elements of the solidarity account presented here refer to solidarity's descriptive dimension. And in my paper, I described this a little bit more, that we run into some difficulties with viewing solidarity like this. The latter two elements, they refer to the normative dimension of solidarity. And my argument is that in an ethics and design context, we need to conceive of solidarity not as a social practice, but as a perspective or lens, that we can focus on the normative result and aspiration of solidarity. And this can then guide us or technologists, so computer engineers and so on, in an ethical design process. I will focus on these due to time constraints. I will focus on these two elements. All right, so this first element I want to go into is the motivational source. And as I stated before, it's a prerequisite for solidarity that we have relations of mutual recognition. And this entails that two conditions must be met in order for solidarity to actually exist. This is on the one hand, that people need to mutually recognize their rights. And second, that we need to grant each other social esteem by ensuring opportunities for self-realization. And from an ethics in design perspective, this would then entail the following. First of all, AI systems cannot be designed in a way that they violate rights, so they ought to be in line with fundamental and human rights. And there is actually an extensive discussion about the risks that AI systems pose to human and fundamental rights. So by building and deploying systems that violate human and fundamental rights, technologies have the potential to undermine solidarity among the members of the community. Conversely, where AI systems are designed to be aligned with solidarity, they are required to comply with these rights. And then concerning the second form of recognition, in order for AI systems to be in line with the normative aspirations of solidarity, they ought not to be designed to reduce opportunities to self-realize. Honneth describes self-realization as a process of articulating and realizing individual life goals without coercion. So AI systems have actually been found to limit opportunities for the realization of individual life goals. For instance, when AI systems deny certain people the opportunity to receive a loan or assess women as ineligible to do high-paying jobs, and therefore the ads are not delivered to the women. According to Honnet, such constraints on a person's life are incompatible with solidarity, and therefore technologies aligned with solidarity must be designed to guarantee people's opportunities for self-realization. Okay, so there are several ethics and design methods that could actually help to fulfill these normative aspirations. For instance, we have stakeholder identification that could help to clarify who may be affected by AA technologies and how. Then we have user-centric or participatory design methods that aim to identify users and other stakeholders' interests and needs and account for them in the design process. Participatory design is then especially interesting from a solidarity perspective because it involves this collective decision making, which can generate a sense of solidarity within the group. So, and then we have also universal, systemic, or human-centered design, which could broaden the perspective from not only users, but also broaden the perspective towards all humans within the socio-technical system, which is actually necessary to account for indirect stakeholders being simply affected by the technologies. Okay, now let's turn to the last element. This is the element of duty, which also refers to the normative dimension of solidarity. And this entails an obligation to ensure the just distribution of benefits and burdens. While many ethics and design frameworks actually include an evaluation of the impacts that technologies may have on society, a solidarity perspective would then entail not only the assessment of harms and benefits overall, but also how they are distributed across society. So for instance, the collection and usage of health data can pose a risk to the right to privacy to all data subjects equally. However, some of those data subjects may actually carry additional costs because when AI systems analyze health data to find out who has genetic predispositions and must therefore pay a higher health insurance fee, then the risks or harms of the systems are unevenly distributed between those who are rather healthy and do not have any predispositions, whereas compared to unhealthy people. So a solidarity perspective would hence require also an assessment of how different stakeholders may be affected in different ways. So the question is, who carries the burdens, who carries the benefits, and how could we ensure that they are fairly distributed? Okay, so to conclude, it has been argued that in an ethics and design perspective, solidarity needs to be conceived not as a social practice, but rather a perspective or lens with which to shift the focus towards solidarity's normative aspirations. And by focusing on these normative aspirations, solidarity could potentially provide some guidance in designing ethical AI by accounting for three aspects. First, computer engineers and other technologies need to make sure that an AI system does not lead to violations of human fundamental rights. They also need to make sure that opportunities for self-realization are not constrained and the interests and needs of individuals, as well as the collective societal needs are accounted for. And then three, they also need to make sure that risk and benefits are distributed in a just way. And I would argue that methods such as stakeholder identification, participatory and universal design may support the process of completing these tasks by shifting the focus towards society's interests and needs. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I would like to encourage all the participants to send their questions on chat. And this presentation is titled Ethical Questions Regarding Usage of AI by Law Enforcement Authorities.
Yes, good afternoon. At first, I would like to thank you very much for introducing me, and I'm also very grateful for having the possibility of participation in the conference. At first, I would like to analyze the issue of ethical questions regarding the usage of AI by law enforcement agencies. And I have to clarify the way in which the expression law enforcement agencies will be used for this presentation. I decided to adopt the wide understanding of this expression, which covers not only agencies which detect and prevent crimes, but also the agencies which are involved in judicial activity like courts and correction agencies. It's important that in case of fighting criminal activities, AI can be utilized at the earliest stages of investigation. And it can be also used at even earlier stages of prevention of crime. It should be also noted that the AI usage can deflect also on court proceedings and correction system. Therefore, it's important to take into account that all of these fields of coping with crimes can be influenced by the usage of AI. Another important factor which encouraged me to use this wide interpretation is the fact that the using of AI at the earlier stages also influences the proceedings at the later stages at courts. Of course, if we analyze the usage of AI in the judicial system, we should take into account various documents which are important from legal standpoint, even if these documents are not legally binding, like mentioned today, ethics by design. This is a document issued by European Commission, or the documents like resolutions recognizing Bangalore principles which defer to ethics of judiciary. When we should analyze the possibilities which AI offers for the agencies which are aimed at fighting criminal activity, we may analyze systems of facial recognition, because they can be useful for the police activity. They can analyze photographs faster and more efficient than humans. However, there are many concerns with regard to these systems, as it has been proven that AI systems of facial recognition have still problems with identifying some groups of people, like African American, for instance. Furthermore, it should also be noticed that there are still problems regarding privacy issues, because in spite of the fact that these systems could be useful for the preventing crime activities or for the detecting the people who committed crimes, extensive CCTV systems would have to be utilized. And this could cause problems regarding privacy activity, and not only. We should take into account the fact that in spite of the fact that proceedings would be shorter and less expensive, the society would also experience that the criminals would receive just punishment according to the trustworthy proofs from CCTV systems. But this feeling would be also increased by the fact that there would be more evidence against criminals. However, the introduction of this technology would cause such problems like chilling effect. The feeling of control would deprive people of the will of engaging into social activism. People would also have concerns that they could be punished for using their right for free speech, and therefore this technology could cause risk for the democracy and could also cause leaning into authoritarianism. Furthermore, there are problems regarding the control of utilizing of this system, because such systems could collect a huge amount of data, but there are problems regarding the fact if there are control bodies which could be able to control effectively these systems. there are also questions if it could be possible to control whether the data is used for the legitimate reasons, or maybe whether the system is misused, for instance, for the such activities which are dangerous for the democratic society. Another issue is crime prediction, which can be also used with AI. However, the AI are using the data which was input in the earlier stages of police works. However, the data can be biased at the stage of inputting the data into AI systems, and therefore the AI outcomes can be biased because of the wrongful data. And the working with AI utilizing such wrongful data may also lead to negative outcomes, like over-policing in some areas, which could contribute to good outcomes in high amount of detected crimes. But on the other hand, another places would have only small amount of police officers patrolling them, and therefore the rate of crime detected there would be really small, and because of that the outcome, which could probably be positive, can consequently be negative for the society as a whole. Furthermore, it should be also taken into account that AI can be used not only for the general prevention, but also for the individual prevention. AI can be used for assessing whether the criminal who is already in the prison has good chances for his successful correction. However, also in this case, AI can be biased because the outcomes of AI are basing on the data which was inputted in the earlier stages of the work of professionals which are dealing with the assessing of criminals. On the other hand, AI takes into account only those factors which were pre-programmed, and there are also still questions if statistical methods which are utilized by the AI with this respect are really feasible for the assessing of the chances which criminal has for the correction. Furthermore, AI systems can be also used at courts undertakings, also for the administrative work. And we could assume that AI can be helpful for the administration at courts, but also with these respects, there are some concerns, because the court's proceedings are also dependent on the administrative work which was done by court, for instance, which with respect to choosing the judges for the given cases. And it should be taken into account that if AI chooses the judges, the AI has to give the full information on the factors which were taken into account with choosing given judge to given case. Furthermore, if the AI should use the lottery for choosing the judge, the lawyers may have problems with verifying whether the AI worked properly with this respect. However, the most controversial issue is using the AI during proceedings. Some countries have already introduced AI at first instance courts for adjudging the petty cases. However, there are still concerns with regard to the question whether such electronic AI judge fulfills the principles stemming from Bangalore principles, like the principle of integrity. Really, is AI judge capable to take into account all factors which should be taken into account if the allegedly easy case turns out to be difficult one, or maybe is the AI judge capable to take into account also judicial modality. AI can be also used during judicial proceedings, but also with this respect, there are concerns whether the AI could influence the judge's impartiality. In this case, we can see that AI can help the work of judge and judicial organizations, but in some cases it can constrict its freedom and autonomy. Of course, this topic is very complex, and I don't have time to present it more complex. I see that I'm run out of time by now, so I have to thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Podraza. The fourth presentation in this session will be delivered by Paulina Jaroszyk from University of Warsaw, and the title is Responsibility for the Gender-Biased AI.
Everyone, okay. So I think my presentation will be some continuation, and I want to start with we often associate events with the past, and now we are like phone, voice assistant.
Excuse me, we have problems with sound. We can hardly hear you. Could you please speak to the microphone directly?
Okay, will it be better like this?
Much
Okay.
better. Thank you.
Okay, so we think that the ignorance and biases we had in the past, and now we think that it's not the case, but unfortunately it's far from truth, and biases from being obvious and explicit, like for example restricting women from voting, became even more dangerous in the way that they are implicit and hidden, and they remain unnoticed until we face them directly. So the next question is, so where the biases are after all? And Perry Hinton argues that when we use the term cognitive biases in order to locate the source of prejudices in the minds of individuals, we are omitting one very important point, which is the influence made by culture on its members. And he explains that this issue with the help of the notion of predictive brain, to demonstrate that implicit stereotypes are part of our ordinary perceptual mechanism, which enables our functioning in the culture. So how does it work? And implicit stereotypes can be defined as fixed sets of attributes associated with a social group, and it is established on the basis of two theoretical concepts. The first one is associative networks in semantic memory, and second one is automatic activation. So this suggests that our human memory links the concepts on the basis through the associative network and establishes different levels of strength between different concepts based on frequency of encountering them in an experience. And for example, and of course this experience is culturally situated. For example, in the cultures when it is popular and normal to spread butter on bread, the concept of bread and concept of butter will be having very strong link together. But in the cultures where it's not the case, the link will be, of course, much weaker. And it is important to notice that there is no pure and unbiased mind, and it doesn't matter how many prejudices we have. The implicit stereotypes is something so deep in our minds that we just all have them in order to survive in our cultures. And very good news for us is that cultural knowledge is fluid and open to change. So it is not fixed identity. And for example, if people thought that slavery was okay centuries ago, and now the culture developed and we know that it's already unacceptable. And fighting stereotypization in this case must not be on the shoulders of individuals, but it should be based on multiple strategies of communication of meaning within different social and cultural networks. And how it is connected to technology. some might think that it's hard to believe that technology can be gender biased, for example, and we expect artificial intelligence to provide us with neutral and exact information that accustomed to our needs. However, the gender biases can be found, for example, in the Google Translate and Amazon and PayPal. And of course, I want to say that those examples might seem very minor, but this is the point of it, that they are very minor, but they're just so widespread that we might not notice them, and this is the harm that they're bringing. For example, in Google Translate, when you try and translate word from English, from like friend or teacher into Polish, it doesn't give a male and female version of the word through the slash, for example, przyjaciel, przyjaciółka, but it gives only the male version of it. And in Amazon, for example, they use the artificial intelligence in order to sort all the applications for the job. And due to the lack of representation of women in their data set, all the people who got the job were men. And in the Apple Pay, it was known for giving higher credit limits to men rather than women. So a survey was conducted in Turkey by the group of researchers in 2017 that demonstrated that such words as women or girl appears more often surrounded by words connected with family, and the word man appears next to the words including the career. And computers don't actually, when they read the text, they don't actually understand the text how we do. It just reduces the meaning to the statistical proximity, which allows algorithms in a way to understand the text. And there's some people who are trying to argue that, AI developers who are trying to argue that, well, we are building our bots in the way that it will be mimicking humans. And if human interaction is full of biases, why should we strive to create unbiased technologies? And I think it is very important to do so because the technology is a part of culture, and every experience that we have with our culture, with our technologies, stays in our semantic memory. And our perception functions in a way that it tries to just minimize the surprises of whatever we're encountering. And in this way, I think that there should be some kind of a moral responsibility for technologies. And there might be, for example, 2 points of some kind of a solution to it. The first one, I would say, is some kind of a moderation, because if we cannot assure that AI at this point can provide us with unbiased results, it needs some kind of a moderator to just double check the outcome that we have. And the second one, which I think even more important, is that we should change the data set in the way that it will be equally represented, representing all different groups. For example, we can have big troubles also in the sphere of medicine, because minorities and underrepresented social groups are at risk of unfair treatment. For example, there are people of color, poor people, people with no access to the internet. We might think that, okay, the internet is everywhere, but there are still people who don't have the access to the internet, and they equally deserve to have medical care just like any other persons. For example, other people with disabilities, people with different social status, women, and so on. And I know that it will be hard, but for sure, the results are very rewarding. And in this case, if we'll try to, I think that, first of all, we should not exclude artificial intelligence, because it can, with a little bit of adjustment, can give us greater good. For example, if we'll change it a little bit, it will provide us with more just and unbiased decisions. And due to the fact that artificial intelligence is very quick in analyzing data, it will be very helpful when the quick decision is needed. And the second one, a more social aspect, it will just surround us again with will provide us with a lot of experience, which will motivate people to be more tolerant, and it will in a way teach us to become some kind of better people, as we can say in this way. So I think that technology is a very powerful tool, and we just need how to wisely use it. So thank you very much. I tried to be quick.
Thank you very much. It was an interesting and quick presentation. Thank you for keeping time regime. And now let's move on to the fifth presentation, non-financial aspect of cooperation with vendors in IT support, what we measure, what will be measured. It will be delivered by Mr. Bartosz from University of Łódź.
Hey, hello everyone. Can you see my screen and my presentation? So without further ado, let's jump into the topic. I will focus on non-functional aspect of cooperation with vendors in IT support. So we are skipping all the budgeting and whatnot. Of course, I'm talking about how we are designing the cooperation with the vendors and how we are also designing the rules of the cooperation. Before I will move to the details, I want to make sure that we have the common ground and we know, everybody knows what I'm talking about. So when it comes to the IT support, it's always a situation when somebody has some kind of issue and with the technical perspective of their work, for example, and they need some kind of support. So in the background, there's always something that needs to be fixed. So for example, I'm sharing the presentation, and if for some reason I would be not able to, my network is down and whatnot, I would have to somebody to reach to, and that person would be able to fix it in a timely manner. When we're talking about vendors, we are having in mind the service providers, so the companies or people who are giving us the service. Every single case or report of such a technical issue, it's measured or recorded in tickets and cases. So every measure I will talk about is directly connected to those tickets. Those cases can have different priorities because, of course, it's something different that one person have issue with my presentation. Then, for example, whole department has issues with a network and they don't have any means to work, right? So this is a different priority. And of course, we are talking also with different channels of support. We can have, phone, email, chat, so different means of contact with the support. So all those things I'm talking about, the measurements, all connected to SLA. So the standard license agreement, a standard basic document, which is done by the service provider and the customer. The most important thing is that we need to remember that most of the times that SLA is generally set by the customer. So we have some demands, we have some requests, we have some requirements that vendor needs to provide and take their deal of the bargain. So with that short introduction, what we measure or what we measured till now, so to say. So first of all, we were measuring something which usually was called SLA fulfillment or support promise. It was a basic measurement. It was concerning all the cases, so throughout all priorities, throughout all channels that we had. And traditionally, it was presented as a percentage of cases resolved in time. So for example, for let's say the example with the broken presentation, I had some time limit to fix it. For example, 1 day, right? And it doesn't really matter if I fix it in 1 hour or in a half a day or just 23 hours, right? As long as I was fitting in that stiff time frame, I was still okay in the meaning of the contract, right? So everything was okay and it was fixed in the given time. Another thing which was measured is the so-called first call resolution, FCR. So it was connected to the phone as a means of contact, and it was described as the percentage of number of cases which the IT support was able to solve kind of on the spot. So we are calling them, and that's the only thing that we need to do. We are taking, saying what was wrong, and they are fixing that right on the spot. What is important, it doesn't really matter how long it took. It could take 5 minutes, it could take 30 minutes, but it's still regarded as a first call resolution because we were, so to say, handled by just one person. Other thing is the availability of support. So something which is connected to availability of skilled personnel. So usually it was measured as a number of incoming, let's say, contacts from the customers, right? So how many times customers were calling versus how many times the customers actually reach somebody who could help them. And I would say one more very important, non-financial aspect of the cooperation was the customer satisfaction survey. And with that, we had a lot of issues because those were not very standardized. We had many options, many questions. We could have one question, we could have 10 questions, we could have 5 questions, you name it, whatever you want. And with that, of course, the methodology was kind of loose because we didn't actually know if on scale 1 to 10, if 5 is a good score or not really, right? In comparison, for example. And what is also very important in that measurement, all the questions and all the topics of that survey were connected to the satisfaction of the user. So most of the cases were somewhere in between, are you satisfied with the service? Are you satisfied with the call and whatnot? But what happened? What happened that we thought that those measurements are not good enough and that we need to change? So first of all, of course, effect of pandemic. We went online mostly, right? So we had to, for example, shut down the stores that we had, shut down the offices, and everybody went online. And that directly affected the so-called business continuity plans. So plans in case something happens. For example, before pandemic, let's say we are, I know, huge store like, I know, IKEA or something, that we have several stores in the country. If one store is not working, that's pretty urgent, but we have still other stores, right, that are still, operating. But in the pandemic reality, we had only one store, which was the online store. So if that is not working, that is, I would say, critical, and our business lifeline, so to say, was compromised. So that was a lot of changing of perspective. We didn't have a backup plan. Everything had to work, and it had to work now. And the second thing, very important, is the watermelon SLA effect. It was something visible even before pandemic, but easiest way to imagine is take a watermelon, take a slice, and you will easily see that the skin, so the outside is green, but everything inside is red, right? So it usually means that all the measures that I mentioned were, in the matter of contract of fulfillment of those measures, were green. So for example, I had everything good with the support promise or CSAT, but in reality, the customers were not satisfied. Everything was on red, despite the fact that that the measurements were okay. So that happened, and we thought that that there are some better ways to design that cooperation with the vendors. And now we are going through the things that will be measured or already are measured. So we'll measure something called MTTR. So it's mean time to resolve. It's something presented as a mean time to resolve something, usually in hours or in days. And when we compare that to the SLA fulfillment, we don't have stiff time frame. So there's not like, 3 days for fixing something. I need to fix all the kinds of issues or specific kind of issue in the set mean time. And another aspect of that measurement is that we are striving, our goal is to constantly shortening that time of resolution. So for example, in 1 month, I have time for 2 days. In 2 months, I need to shorten it to just 1 day and a half, and so on and so on. So moving ourselves, striving to be better at solving and faster at solving the cases. Another thing connected with the customer satisfaction or measurement of the customers is the NPS, so Net Promoter Score. It's also kind of a satisfaction survey, but it's not connected to satisfaction, but to the reputation of the company. We are asking about recommendations. So if you like us enough to, for example, recommend you to your grandpa, right, and so on and so on. What's more, NPS has a very established and easy to follow methodology, so it's very easy to compare not only between departments but also with the competence on the market. Other thing with the direct effect of the customer is the customer effort scale. It's something that we are using when or will use when NPS it simply cannot be used or it doesn't really make sense to use it. We are in that scale checking for the effort, so how easy it is for the customer to reach for the support and how easy it is to handle all the fixes from the user perspective. And of course, it's also easy to compare and has a very established good methodology. Another aspect, which is, I would say, something new and I would say time of our mark of our times, is the deflection rate. It's used in the channels which are easily to automate, like chat, and it's directly connected to the automations. So it's usually measured as a number or percentage of contacts from the customers which were not involving any human being on the IT support side. So in, I would say, clean version is that we are helping customers to help themselves without engaging our personnel, which then in turn can have time to fix the more complex issues. And conclusion. So we have few trends appearing. So first of all, there is a focus on faster resolution. We need to be faster every day. There is a focus on use of adaptation and self-help options. So we are striving to help users or customers to help themselves with the easy things. And we also have a trend to using measurements, use it in other departments and areas like e-commerce in the IT support like we had with CES, for example. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker in this session of our conference will be Dominik Zieliński from Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń. And his presentation is titled Missed Opportunity, IT Studies Graduate Ethical Approach Towards Social Responsibility.
Hello, thank you. So I will talk about the role of education in this ethical approach. So first of all, why bother? There is rapid digitization and it causes a lot of disruption. You can say Facebook is an example. It's like the modern 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island was a power plant which malfunctioned in the early 60s, and there was a problem to determine what caused the malfunction. And you can say Facebook is a little bit like this because as recently there was a leaked document that said that engineers don't know 100% how the data is proceeded in the algorithms of Facebook. So I would say that's a symbol of how digitization is going on. How could we resolve the issue of rapid digitization, or at least how could we mitigate risks? So I have an assumption that teaching social responsibility to engineers which are in the middle of the process could be one way to mitigate the risks. And therefore I asked how the universities are engaging, how are they teaching computer science students the social responsibility, and in what respect. And what is interesting is that it is kind of required. The Polish law on higher education states that the mission of the system is to shape civic attitudes and participation in social development, as well as it should function with ethical principles and with special importance of the social responsibility of science. But on the other way, there is supposed to create an economy based on innovation. So as we know, economy or the business doesn't always come in line with ethics, but that is a contradiction I will come back to later. So I conducted a research which consists of document analysis. I analyzed computer science curriculums on 9 research universities, focusing mostly on learning outcomes. I conducted a web survey on one of the universities, asking students, and I conducted in-depth interview with 4 lecturers from this university and with 8 students. So when I ask about social responsibility competence, I ask about knowledge, skills, and attitude. And when it comes to social responsibility, according to literature, it is backed by the sociological imagination. So it is needed that the people or the person recognize the social grounding of problems. And it's hard to define a close definition of social responsibility, but it could consist, for example, in case of knowledge of the people could know non-technical characteristics of scientific and technological development. In case of skills, the person could know the way to mitigate risks related to the product they are working on. And in case of attitude, for example, the readiness and willingness to act in the socially responsible way. And the results, basically the students had broad technical knowledge, which is also needed, but in case of non-technical knowledge, it was quite common and rather unstructured. In case of skills, what was clearly seen, it was they valued critical thinking. And in case of attitude, they recognized the value of social responsibility. They were really interested in developing the competence, but they weren't quite sure if they should, because it was outside of their field of discipline. What I also observed, it was a little paradox, because they could name a lot of risk of digitization, like privacy loss, like the fear of self-aware AI, like the addictions. But when they were asked about if the technology development benefits society as a whole, 88% agrees with this statement. And maybe it's not that surprising, because when the Eurobarometer was conducted, 86% of population answered to the same question, answered as well that they agree with this. So what is the reason? I think one of them is the sources of knowledge. When I asked them how do they know about some digitization risks, not many of them pointed at the university. For example, methods for preventing algorithm bias, only 15% of people pointed at the university. Most of them either learned this by themselves or didn't know this topic at all. So what are the factors for all of this? First of all, the university don't teach these topics, therefore other sources come up and take this place. And when I talk with students, they didn't have much sources to look for. Mostly these were websites, but the websites are mostly technical and concerning cybersecurity. And the other ones are popular science channels on the internet, or just news about the digitization innovations. Another thing is that there is a culture of not talking about social responsibility. All of the people I spoke to said that it is something that they know by themselves and they don't really speak about it. So the lecturers don't speak about it with each other, and they don't speak about it with students, and students also don't speak about it with each other. But at the same time, every one of them had some opinion on these topics and their own ideas. They just didn't share them with each other. Another thing is red tape. The lecturers were quite interested in the idea of incorporating more topic of social responsibility to the curriculum of computer science, but they were skeptic. They thought that it could be hard to change the programs in order to incorporate more of this topic. But at the same time, when we look at the framework for qualifications, as European as well as Polish, there are stated requirements that the ethics and the social responsibility of science should be included. But when I analyzed the programs, it was interpreted quite freely. Often the social topics were exchanged for example, business topics, and they were supposed to teach the same, but the topics were quite different. And this leads us to my final conclusion, that the learning outcomes are heavily influenced by the market. And a lot of universities stated in the descriptions of the computer science studies that the courses were created because of the demand on the market. So this shows how it is influenced, and we could say that the market influences how the computer science is taught. And yes, so to summarize all of it, I would say the universities are halfway to social responsibility in this way, because there is some institutional barriers. At the same time, the people, the academic society isn't they are eager to learn and they are eager to develop these competences. They just have to be there. Just has to be some barriers to be taken off. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to thank all the speakers in this session. All the presentations were very interesting, and now it's time to discuss them. We have the first question on chat. It's a question by Catharina Rudschies addressed to Paulina. Can you read these questions on chat? Can you see that?
Yes, okay, I
Yes.
will read it out loud. So could you expand a bit on the idea to use moderation as a solution to combat biases in technologies? How exactly would that look like and be put into practice? And who would need to execute such moderation? So unfortunately, due to the time constraints, I couldn't explain it well, but I think that there is a problem of, for example, we can argue that if people are biased, how we can trust on them on moderating AI and thinking that it will provide better solution. So in this way, I think that it will not be directly combating the biases, but it will prevent potentially negative outcomes, at least in some way. So it will be some kind of just a first step into greater solution while we still wait until the data set, for example, will be revised. In the way how it will be executed, I think that, of course, the best way, again, is just to revise everything. But if it will be just too much, it can be worked in the way of problem and solution way. For example, if we notice something suspicious, like in this way of putting too many guards in the regions where there are certain ethnicities are living, or for example, that in Amazon only men got the job offers, we just need to revise those specific issues. And who will be executing such moderations? I think maybe a group of certain specialists like ethicists and so on will be the best decision in this way. That's it from my part.
Thank you for your explanation. Do we have any further questions to?
May I respond to that immediately? So yeah, thank you very much for your answer. So you said that some ethicists or specialists should be involved in these kind of moderating tasks. But where do they sit? Where they are located? So would they be employed at the companies themselves, or at is that like an independent oversight body, or where exactly would they be installed, so to say, and paid by whom? Because we see that with Facebook, for example, with the ethics board, and there's been a lot of criticism about the effectiveness of this board, because actually Mark Zuckerberg can still overrule all the decisions or the recommendations. So exactly, maybe you can respond to that.
Turn on your microphone, please.
Okay. Since I was not thinking about it as such a prominent solution, I wasn't thinking about it that much, but I think it's worth noticing. However, I don't know it at the moment, so I think I need to think about it, because it can be actually a problem of trying to figure out who exactly should be conducting, who will be sponsoring it. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Are there any further questions to our speakers?
Maybe may I respond to Katharina's reply? Oh, sorry, I switch on my camera, perhaps. I don't have a very sophisticated answer, but I believe what the current practice is that the closer the project, the development project is to academia, the more there is a tendency to involve accompanying research packages.
I mean, it's still the case that, for example, a project that applied funding from the Horizon 2020 funding source, they sometimes even have to have these accompanying research projects. I have seen this in nanotechnology a lot, also in energy-related projects and so on, that there were like work packages within larger research consortia that had these sometimes ethicists, sometimes social scientists, STS people, technology assessment, and so on. They are actively involved, which is often, of course, only the case when there's an awareness for something being at stake. Yeah, then from the beginning, they are part of the project. Then there are a few others, mostly from energy sector. I know the debates, for example, on radioactive waste disposal and so on, where there is a problem identified where this kind of moderation is not taking place. And then it's often the scientists themselves that step forward and say, let's initiate this process. There is something to be moderated. And then it's again, it's mostly social scientists with help of normative scientists in the widest sense. There must not be ethicists, whatever that is. I'm not moral philosophers, but from the field of applied ethics, that they have these means of discourse moderation, both in the methodological sense, but also in the conceptual and content sense, of course, that they organize events, could be an afternoon, sometimes could be 2 days, like where the important stakeholders come together. And I think other fields where methodologies have been developed and tested are like open innovation, where platforms are created where as many stakeholders as possible are involved in the processes. And in that sense, it's this moderation is somehow distributed among the innovators. And here I mean more like economic actors, for example, an innovation team from a company, but usually also with the help and competence of academic experts from that field.
Can I offer a few suggestions, Bartosz? I think it's interesting because there's no one solution to this. I happen to chair the working party that established the guidance on ethics advisors and ethics advisory boards for H2020 for the Commission. So what Jan is saying is right. I mean, the role of ethics advisors has been seen to be very important and to be instituted right at the start of a project. Sometimes a single ethics advisor is deemed to be enough, depending on the complexity of the ethical challenges. On other occasions, then an ethics board is deemed to be appropriate, which might have an ethicist, you know, philosopher on it, might have a social scientist, but more likely it's going to have somebody who has the specific research and scientific expertise of that project, as well as having ethical interests and ethical expertise and competence as well. But the other issue has to do with that's an ethical advisory role. Ethics moderation can be much more complicated, as you've indicated, in terms of, let's say, an organization like Facebook or Amazon or whatever. It's all very well that they say, now we've got an ethics board or we have an ethics advisor. But governance arrangements won't allow that to be more than, if you like, an ethics opinion. It can't be, an ethics approval. I mean, even within the Commission note, there's a kind of a delicate balance between the opinion of an ethics review and the approval process, which requires that the scientific approval is done as well. I mean, there's an interesting parallel within what's going on in the British government circles at the moment, when the ethics advisor to the UK Prime Minister only lasted 2 months, the last one, and the one before that lasted about a year. But, the Prime Minister took no notice of what he had to say. Now, so, that moderation role is always going to be difficult when governance rules over ethics. And I suppose the only solution to that is to make these things as transparent as possible. So, the difficulty, for example, in the recent resignation of the Prime Minister's ethics advisor is he's not saying why he resigned. Now, that's a crucial piece of information. What is it that's ethically challenging that caused him to actually say, I can't do this role anymore. So what I'm saying is these are a range, it's a spectrum of different engagements, you know, from, if you like, ethics advice, which might be one advisor on a complex project. And project I mentioned earlier on in the day when I was talking about the security project, we actually had a ethics and societal impact advisory group, which had 20 people on it. Now, admittedly, that was for a 40+ million euro project, so we could afford to have 20 people on the project. But I can tell you, they were all very knowledgeable, very expert, and guided both the ethics and the assessment of societal impact as well. So, and this goes back to your point that, you know, I think both Paulina and Catharina were touching on, and that is it costs money. And it's only if people are willing to spend that kind of money and see the relevance of it, and it doesn't just become a corporate mission statement that is tokenist, because that's the real danger. You know, these must be, you know, the moderation and the advice role must be engaged. Okay, I hope I added something to the conversation there.
Can I respond to that? You said that as long as governance overrules ethics, that's going to be a problem. Wouldn't then the solution maybe be that ethics or moderation, however we want to call it, is part of a governance framework then? So that actually, you know, we kind of give the rule that there needs to be a certain procedure of moderation in order for such projects to be according to law, compliant with law. So that would be my question to you. And the other thing is that I think now in the discussion we had kind of two layers. On the one hand, we talked about a little bit more research-oriented projects. I think that's kind of different from what Paulina talked about, like the Amazon case or the PayPal case or these kind of things where we already have established technology. So it's not an innovation project where we can actually early on in the process introduce an ethics advisory board or something. But we already have an established product on the market where only exposed we can basically say as a moderator, okay, there is a problem with this, so how can we actually deal with it? Yeah, that just as a comment, so to say that I think we have to distinguish a little bit between at what stages we actually have moderation and what kind of effects it can have then.
Yes, what a wonderful world in which ethics overrules governance, right? What a wonderful world in which morality comes above everything else, right? I don't wish to sound too cynical, but you can see, let's take the problem with Facebook. You know, the original mission was connectivity, you know, solidarity, if you like, you know, increasing communication between networks and so on. Wonderful method. And then it becomes a very, very, what's the word, profit gaining, for want of a better, wealth gaining commercial enterprise, which also has tremendous political power and political influence. And so immediately, whoever holds the reins in Facebook, and we know who that is or was, won't let that go. And the guy who's bought it won't let it go, right? And that's because he has a particular, it's not just wealth generating, he's in a position where he doesn't care about the wealth now. He claims to care more about freedom of speech. But we all know we're in an ethics, you know, discussion here. Freedom of speech has, you know, has to be balanced by the risks to the communities that you damage if you are too free in your speech. So, you know, the dilemma is who is going to let go of, let's say, commercial accountability? Who is going to let go? You know, if the company is about making money, then they're not going to pass it over to ethicists, right? Unless they can see the possibility that they'll, you know, potentially have a wealth generating or economic change possibility. I can actually give you an example in a field I'm interested in, and that is the development of food technologies and so on. I happen to be vegan, I used to be able to buy a very, very nice vegan mayonnaise, right, from an American source. Actually, I live in France, so it actually came through a French distributor. She eventually discovered that the vegan mayonnaise had been bought out by a dairy company. Now, and so she decided that she could no longer ethically support a dairy company that had bought out, you know, a very good vegan mayonnaise, I should say. So if you like, the ethical principle was to not use anything dairy in producing a mayonnaise. The dairy company needs to move, it needs to change, because people are moving, I'm proud to say, in a less meat-eating or dairy-oriented direction. So it's the commercial advantage of the dairy company to move in that direction. Now, what do? Do I condemn them morally for once having been a dairy company, right? But now they're actually moving in another direction. Now, so what I'm actually saying is you have an overriding commercial factor here that needs to be borne in mind, and they're not going to let that go to ethics. I mean, actually, they did not let people know that they were a dairy company at first, and it had to be discovered by diverse means. And they did it because they knew vegans would not like to support a dairy company. Now, so, you know, again, it is a wonderful idea to be able to say ethics should, you know, overrule governance. But there are plenty of examples in the past when commercial interests will necessarily, well, you know, they will say, what are we here for? We're here for to make a profit. That's our primary motive, and it's unethical of us to consider anything else, right? And that's been said before by a lot of corporate magnates, I should say. It's more complex than it, you know, on the face of it. I think you and I, let's say, Catharina, would like it to be. Ethics should, of course, overrule, but it won't.
Yeah, my idea was not so much that ethics overrules governance. My idea was more that basically we have a governance framework where there are clearly set rules that basically govern how ethics ought to assist the process, basically. So that they kind of cooperate, governance and ethics kind of cooperate, and they kind of intertwine somehow. So that was maybe a little bit more my idea, but of course, I mean, it would be nice if ethics would somehow have a more dominant role. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I agree with you. It'd be nice to see it and see how that could actually be accomplished. I'll give you an example. I have to be very careful here, but let's say I was an ethics advisor for a UK ministry of some kind, right, a department of government. And if I was an ethics advisor for them, then I know very well that government policy would override whatever ethical decisions that I would give. And I have to write that into, you know, I have to sign a contract that says that. Now, I would like not to be able to, I'd love to be able to tell you the government department that I'm operating in, right? But I can't, because I have to sign an agreement that says transparency in this case is not allowed. Now, it seems to me the prime ethical consideration ought to be transparency, ought to be honesty, so that ideology can't overrule ethics. However, what do? Do I say, well, I can't possibly work in that situation? Or do I say it's best if I try to operate within a, you know, quite a complex situation where governance and ethics have to be balanced, as you say. But I don't know the ideal solution to that, other than to say one day everybody will be good. Interesting, thank you.
Thank you very much for your helpful comments.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. Do we have any further questions to this presentation or any other presentation from this first session of the conference? If not, I would like to thank you once again, all our speakers and all of you who are attending this session. Now it's time for another break, and we'll meet within some 15 minutes. I'd like to invite you for the fourth session of this conference, which will begin 5 minutes to 3 p.m. Thank you and have a nice break, and see you soon.